Hi, everybody. It has been so long since I've just gotten on here and shared my thoughts. Um, and I've been wanting to do videos where I just sit down and share what I've been thinking about for quite some time. And I don't know why I haven't. I think I've kind of tried for this channel to be a space to house my creativity, my poetry. I've also moved away from um, my interviews, and I'm wanting to get back into all of that. But I wanted to come on here and share a thought that came to me a couple days ago that is just one of those things that like has just been sitting with me, and I feel like I just need to put out on here and really explore what the heck it is that I was thinking. And not necessarily the content of the thought, but the impetus to do that, to actually sit down and create the video, was inspired by Michelle Gardner from OG Rose. She just put out a really excellent video on being out of control is being controlling. And she just said, I had this thought and I just felt compelled to share it. And I was like, I've also been having this thought that I just need to share. And so the thought is I wrote it in the notes app on my phone that the opposition of evil is not goodness. And I don't exactly remember what the circumstances were when I was thinking that. I think I was thinking of like, what does it mean to live a good life? And how there's a lot of people that you meet in the world who you know, for all intents and purposes, are not bad people. They maybe are married, they have kids, they have a decent job, they stay out of trouble. Um, Legalistically, they are quote unquote good citizens, right? Um, but how there's I mean the gulf between that and a truly exceptional person that you look up to, that you admire, that is inspiring, that can lead people. It seems like the gulf between like the person I just described and that person is almost as wide as from that person to a truly terrible person. And that begs the question, like, what is being missed in our binary between good and evil? And also, like, is the mere absence of evil necessarily good? Um, Meaning, like, it is good that there is an absence of evil, but does that correlate necessarily to goodness? And if not, what then is the quality of goodness? Um, and I think about in my own life, like when, and also the question of, is living without, like, you know, quote unquote, like overt sin. Maybe you're upholding the 10 commandments, um but you're not living a good life, and I'll have to tease out what all of that means. Is that still like a certain kind of sin? And for me, I think about, for myself, like being a younger person, a teenager, and just being so, I was grew up in Silicon Valley, incredibly competitive area. I was surrounded by, kids who were destined to be doctors and lawyers and, uh, engineers, and were swept up in the competitiveness of that. but really had no direction myself, and was kind of just following the herd. And, was a very sensitive, coy, cautious, reserved person. Like, would never speak out of turn. There were certainly, naughty things that I did, but it was, definitely not on like a concerning level, and was a good student. Um, and you like fly just like under the radar enough to where no one like is really alarmed about you. Um, and people might even say, "Oh, he's doing a good job. He's look at his grades." Um, but I look at that in comparison to who I am now, and the the kind of like to steal another Garner term, like the intrinsic motivation that I have to be compelled into goodness, truth, and beauty, that has an energetic movement to it that feels, you know, like self-directed and self-guided. Um, that and the palpable effect that has on other people to be in the presence of that. I've had encounters and experiences where people come out of conversations and they're like, "Thank you, thank you for what you said, what you offered, even just your presence. I feel like I'm able to see something in a different way." And that ability to influence and affect in a positively generative way seems part of goodness. And you know the mere absence of, like, it's like, it's like you have a house, and you think about all the possible things that can like degrade the house's structure, surface. And you're like, well, if the house doesn't have asbestos, it doesn't have mold, it doesn't have leaky faucets, leaky pipes, um the building materials not decaying for any other reason, like, that means it's a good house. And it's like, maybe, like, it wouldn't be a good house without the absence of all of those things. But to have a good house, you can have a house that's structurally sound and has no problems, and it's a bad house. It could be ugly. It could be not practical. It could have colors that clash that don't make sense together. Um, all sorts of things. And so I think when we think about goodness, we tend to try and think of it as the the negation of evil, the kind of like, yeah, the negative image of evil. Um and it's there's so, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like there's an active co-creativeness about goodness that is not merely like stripping away um bad acts. And even I think that actually kind of undermines goodness, because if you're solely like preoccupied by not doing a bad thing. And here's the issue for a lot of people is they're so crippled and paralyzed by the potential of inflicting pain on someone else. I think that's like a deeply held fear by almost every person, is hurting others. And so you won't initiate conflict. You won't say that edgy thing. Um, you won't take any risks because it sets you up for the possibility of rejection and failure. And then people associate goodness with following the rules, keeping yourself in line. And, we can get into a whole economic argument about how that serves capitalism, right? I won't necessarily go there, but you can. Um, and I actually think to be good, you have to risk being bad. I know I'm using these very crude words. I feel like I'm talking like I'm I don't know, a writer of like a superhero comic or something. But for what it's worth, I think, like Daniel Gardner says, like, to, I think he said, like, to be a Christian, you have to risk heresy. Um, and in some sense, the truth of that lies in, it's like goodness and evil are, I don't know, it's like almost in some sense they are kind of founded by a similar, if not the same, motive of, there's like a masculine creative process to it. And you can point to some of the most evil people in the world and say they actually had like a fixation and obsession of destruction, erosion. Sure, but why was that inspired? So that something new can be created in the face of that. Phoenix rising from the ashes. And goodness has a similar like energy to it, where there is there is a pull towards beauty, like an erotic pull towards beauty, and a desire to then instantiate a new paradigm in the world. Um, and that would not arise without a relationship to evil. I think that's the big thing too. Is in order for someone to actually like be inspired to put something good into the world, they have to have a recognition that there are evil forces trying to undermine that and have successfully done that in the past, leading them to actually need to put the good thing out in the world. Um, and I was when I wrote that, and in the days in between writing that and making this video, I've just been thinking also about a lot of people in this corner talk about the end of the World War II consensus, where essentially the world saw the horrors of Hitler, and the United Nations was created in large part around a unified desire to prevent that from ever happening again. And our modern ideas of morality and good and evil come from the figure of Hitler. And so a lot of the Western worlds, like, you know, the alliances that have been formed, the treaties that have been formed, the protections of democracy, um, have been influenced by a motive to be the antithesis of Hitler. And Hitler has essentially been cast as Satan in our modern secular age. Um, and why people are saying that that is declining is in part, from what I understand, is in part because there is no positive, if you'll grant me this word, positive idol to aspire to. And so, in the absence of that, we have a strong what not to be. But it's like almost without something to aspire to, people revert back to animalistic tribal tendencies, and then ironically start to replicate the very things that they were trying to move away from. Um, and so all of that to say, goodness cannot simply be the opposition or the absence of evil, because it's almost like with every reaction, there's an equal and opposite reaction. If you don't have something as potently, um, positive and negative also kind of suck as a dichotomy, because I think goodness is more than just positivity. I think it is integration. It is harmony. It is actually seeing the cyclical nature of reality instead of the kind of uh, like cate- categorical, rigidly um, confined idea of reality. But if there's not something potently good to react against evil, evil will continue to rear its head. Um, and I think about it like in the Old Testament, like the line from what is it, Exodus, where like um, the people of Israel, lived without a king, and each did what he wanted, or something like that, and how chaotic and crazy that was. Um, and how God needed to step in to guide the people um, back to the Holy Land, right? Um, they couldn't have done that themselves. So yeah, I think that's kind of feels satisfactory for now as an exploration, but it's I, yeah, just it felt important for me to explicate that, because it's a reminder to, and it's helping me now say it, because there's just been something in my life in the last couple days that I felt some shame about, a habit that I can't seem to break. And like the temptation is to just like, oh, I just wish that I could get rid of this. I wish that I could just go to some CBT therapist and I could just get a new thought and replace that one, and just the habit would go away. And I would be back to living as a good person. Because right now there's this stain that I feel like is on me. Um, and I think the invitation is goodness. To be a good person is not to be without blemish. It is to tolerate the fact that I do have blemishes, acknowledge that, be honest about that, and have grace for myself in that, and figure out how to still, in the midst of that, relate to that for myself, or if it's someone else that has done something to hurt me, to stay in relation to, if it's a part of me, ask it what it needs. I'm in a psychosynthesis class right now in my graduate program, and the kind of main cornerstone of that style of therapy and philosophy really is the idea that we have multiple subpersonalities, and each of these subpersonalities was born out of a oftentimes wound, but it doesn't always have to be born out of trauma. Um, it can be born out of circumstance, just a dimension of our personality, and all of these subpersonalities have needs, and it is not is it not sign of pathology, the fact that we have these multiple parts. Gurdjieff talks about like the fragmented eyes. It's not, it doesn't mean we're all, you know, all have multiple personality disorder and we're all schizophrenic. It's a part of being human. And the problem arises when we other parts of ourselves, when we try and suppress them, when we feel like they don't belong, or we should have outgrown them, or whatever it might be, when we cast them away and we ostracize them, either they become bigger or they become so neutered that we then become less of ourselves. Um, and so when we encounter evil, the good thing to do is not to try and remove it. It's to believe in the redemptive quality and the humanity of what we have encountered. And I'll leave it at that.